So much for coming. This is How to Audit Drupal Sites. My name is Jon Peck, and I just restarted the music, so I'm going to try that again. Make sure that I'm on the right presentation. There we go. I'm going to post all the slides already up on GitHub, so there will be a PDF afterwards, and I will tweet out a link. So my name is Jon Peck. I'm an architect at Four Kitchens. Four Kitchens is a digital agency based out of Austin, Texas. There's actually no physical office now. We've gone completely digital and remote. I've been working at Four Kitchens for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I worked at Pantheon Systems as a senior customer success engineer, terrifying amount of their documentation, and also one of the utilities that I'm going to be talking about today. Prior to that, I've been working in Drupal for 7 years. Started off making a small brochure site for politicians, and then just kind of blossomed. So, what is an audit? Audits are kind of like these scary words, but what does it actually mean? Well, an audit is an official inspection of accounts. It's going through and reviewing something and saying, okay, is this right? Is this wrong? And then providing feedback. You want to validate the good things, and so people like to know that they're doing something good. And knowing that it's like, hey, we have this expectation that you're doing it in a certain way. Let's give you that feedback and say, yes, indeed, you're doing it. And then if something isn't right, highlight the areas of improvement. This is not exactly the same as just saying that's bad, because that's not constructive. If you say, it's like, I have this expectation, it's like, you're not meeting these expectations, here's what needs to change. That's constructive. That's highlighting areas of improvement. So it's not a punishment. So there's a lot of reasons why you should audit sites. You might want to learn about the contents and structure, especially if you're in a role that sometimes you may need to adopt a site, or someone just asks you, hey, kind of like, what's going on? What's under the hood? How is this been put together? Is this being done right? Or if you're creating a site and as you're moving along, you just want to make sure that you're doing things correctly. You want to ensure optimal configuration, which sometimes when you do a deployment to a production environment, for example, you want to make sure that caching is set up correctly. You there's a lot of moving pieces and lots of opportunities where you can forget just one little tiny checkbox that can have a very significant impact on the performance of the site. Or, for example, leaving on a development module in a production environment, which can actually be a security concern. You also want to discover areas of improvement. Again, it's like you've done all of this. That's fantastic. Oh, by the way, you have all these views over here that aren't actually caching anything, and so that is the performance concern. So within the context of Drupal, every site is unique. We're all unique snowflakes. But with that said, we're all basically all the sites that we're talking about over these past couple of days have been built with the same framework, Drupal. They have similar architectural requirements. It can be a LAMP or a LEMP stack, but they have the same basic characteristics. There's a web server, there's a database server, you might have a key value store of some sort, and you have PHP as the script processor. So with that context, one size fits most. There will always be exceptions. Any type of audit and any type of feedback that you get for any system should be taken with kind of a grain of salt, because it's being prepared in a standardized manner. There may be a very legitimate reason for doing something in an unusual way, but and it should be pointed out to you. It's like, hey, by the way, this is abnormal. You may have done this on purpose, but you should think twice before doing it. So, what are the hallmarks of an effective audit? So an audit should be consistent each time. So when you provide feedback or you run a particular tool, for example, like what color is the sky? We look outside right now and it's blue with clouds. If I do the same check right now using the same technique, I expect the response to be blue. If I run it once and say it's blue, I run it right now and it says it's red, that's an unexpected result. You want to have a consistency each time you do it. It needs to be quantifiable. Blue is a color, but for purposes of like auditing a site, you want to know something is good or something is bad or how bad it is. So, for example, there's a, it's like this is a failure, this is a warning, this is a pass, or maybe this is just information. You need to be able to assign some kind of value to it. And that helps when you're creating a report, an aggregate of that information. Because we respond to things such as, out of 100, how am I doing? I got a 97 out of 100. Okay, I can relate to that kind of score. I don't necessarily have to know everything that went into it, but based on this particular metric, I'm doing well. I got a 20 out of 100. That's probably not good, and even as even in someone in a role that's non-technical who doesn't really care what the contents of the report are, they can recognize that, hey, something needs to change here. Contextually aware. So, for example, if you have a report that is checking for, say, block cache, and say, well, block caching isn't on. Oh, that's a problem. But wait, blocks isn't even enabled. So if you give the feedback that block caching isn't enabled and you need to rectify that, but blocks isn't even available, then why did you do the check in the first place? So you need to have some context to be able to give a logical feedback. And then finally, easy to understand. It's really easy, especially when using automated tools in trying to provide reports, to just give all the fantastic amount of information in a really granular way. And you can say, oh, look at all this work that's been done. We can prove this. But at a certain point, you're kind of baffling them with BS. It's like you want to make sure that at the end of the day, an audit and a report is providing you with things that are understandable. Say, caching needs work. Here are the things that you need to do. That's very straightforward. You don't have to get that granular, at least when you're providing those results. And then finally, actionable recommendations. It's one thing to say, hey, block caching is off. It's another thing to say block caching is off, but if you want to turn it on, go to this interface and click here, or add this line to your settings file to enable it. So give people an opportunity to succeed. There are a number of auditing tools. There's another presentation. Jody has an absolutely fantastic presentation that she gave at Bad Camp that I highly recommend. She takes a more content-based approach and is less tool-oriented. This is going to be a more tool-oriented approach, especially given the context of the work that I was doing at Pantheon, which I'm evaluating thousands of sites at a time and then building tools that will do that for me. So I take a very tool-oriented approach. There's more than one way to do this. But tool that I authored is called Site Audit. It's available on Drupal.org at /project/site_audit. It's a Drupal 7 and 8 site analyzer. Thanks to Google Summer of Code 2015, we actually achieved feature parity between Drupal 7 and 8 versions of Site Audit. So when Drupal 8 was finally launched last year, we were able to actually launch our 1.0 at the same time, which is fantastic. In its current architecture, it is a drush command that is installed on the target platform, not necessarily on your local drush, but actually at least once somewhere on the computer, similar to having drush on a remote site. It does not have to actually be installed in the site itself. It just needs to be available to drush. And finally, it's like it powers the launch check feature on Pantheon. It's very similar to, I'm blanking on the name of the Acquia analytics tool. There's an in-dashboard interface where it will provide you context. So it's similar in operation, with the exception of it is not installed. It doesn't have to be installed. It can be installed platform-wide. It is non-intrusive. It doesn't suffer from the observer effect of creating a weight on the site when it's actually interacting with it. So Site Audit actually reports on a whole bunch of things, including best practices. Things such as the site configuration or the layout of the structure of your sites, like not kind of symlinking everything around in kind of a spaghetti mess, but actually relying on a consistent best practices approach. Block configuration, such as is block enabled, what types of block cache areas are available, and then caching system in general, which will include things such as what kind of caching backend is being used. Do you have anonymous page caching enabled? Are you using a key value store for the cache. If it's within the context of a platform such as Acquia or Pantheon, making the contextually appropriate recommendation, Redis on Pantheon, then cached on Acquia. In code base, just what's the size of this? What's the size of the executable code on disk? And a couple of metrics. I think there's some lines of code metrics in there as well if you have PHP lock installed. The content. So it's this is not a semantic analysis, but it's a structural analysis. So like how many entities and fields exist, what kind of node content types there are. There's within that, like same with taxonomies and vocabularies. So what exists, what is empty, what isn't being used, what might be candidates for deletion. Cron. So is cron enabled? How often is it running? Are you using something like Alicia cron? If it hasn't run in a month, that's kind of a problem. It should run at least on 24, at least once every 24 hours. The database. So checking for things such as the table types, for example. Checking for Latin CI. So for checking for particular character sets. Excuse me. The size of the actual database on disk, which can be helpful if you're trying to just see how large it is, and check for tables that are over specific size, like more than 10,000 rows or 100,000 rows, whatever kind of use case you have. Just trying to give you some context around how big it is. The extensions, so things such extensions refer specifically to modules and themes, so how many are enabled. In Drupal 7's using kind of an arbitrary number of 150 as an average. It's like, okay, you have more modules enabled than the average, you have less, that's a good thing. You have 30 modules enabled. Curious, cool, that's awesome. And then it'll also check for missing extensions, which is at this point is a little bit redundant as a Drupal 7.50, which now will actually throw a PHP error. Thank goodness. When there's a missing extension, because what will happen is Drupal goes into an error state and says, where's this file, where's this file, where's this file? It'll do some front-end analysis, working with external tools such as Google PageSpeed Insights, for example, and that will, what's the other one? Webpagetest.org, which are front-end tools, which I will describe a little bit later. Do some security checks. So it does integrate with modules such as Security Review, and so it doesn't duplicate any of those checks, but it does actually go through and check them, the menu router for any type of potentially malicious callbacks. Basically, if you have any type of PHP executable within the menu system that can run arbitrary commands, that will flag that. System status. So Drupal itself is actually really good at giving you feedback about its health. Some of it's kind of generic, but it's built in. It'll give you reports about, hey, by the way, you're missing the GD extension, for example, or there's you have modules out of date, for example. The extensions report will also check that. Users. So just the number of roles on the system, how many people are in each role, how many users there are, how many are blocked, is user who is user UID1, and including what their email address is. Just kind of giving you context. There's really nothing actionable around that, with the exception of hey, by the way, user ID 1 is blocked. Some people prefer to do that, other people do not. It's a difference in style. Views. Is views enabled? Is views cache enabled? And specifically, there's two different kinds of views caching. There's the rendered results caching, and then the actual query cache itself. So you want to cache the results as long as possible, because as soon as the query cache changes, then the result cache will be regenerated. But and it'll make a recommendation hey, you should enable caching for all these views, with the exception of admin views. And also if you have views cache fully enabled, which will just arbitrarily set default caching, which actually is a great idea. It will recognize that and not give you a false positive on those. And then Watchdog. Is Watchdog enabled, or do you have syslog enabled instead? If you have syslog enabled on Pantheon, it will say, hey, that's kind of a bad idea because you have no way of reading that. If Watchdog is enabled, it'll actually, the DB log specifically, it'll analyze the contents of those logs and flag, for example, PHP errors. If you have, say, more than like 40% of your log is containing PHP errors or warnings of some sort, then maybe you should do something about that. Or you have a lot of 404 errors and that type of analysis. So, Site Audit actually does a lot of things. It's not the perfect panacea. It doesn't do everything, nor should it. It doesn't handle usability and site experience. There are usability tools out there. There's which I will actually go to, but it doesn't actually look at the site itself. It doesn't have any reaction to it. It doesn't care what color it is or what the actual content of your site is. It doesn't really care about the aesthetics. So you could have a really goofy looking site that is impossible to click around. It doesn't care. And again, yeah, it doesn't check anything about the content. So it doesn't care what language the content's in. It is a Drush command, and so it does have an RTFM, read the full manual. It is available. Yeah, I know. Drush help filter equals Site Audit will actually give you all the commands that are available. For example, audit best practices, you can do audit best practices in full, or you can do a short version, ABP. Alternatively, you can just run audit all, which will execute every single one of those, every single one of the checks, reports rather. The only caveat of that particular one is the front-end checks require an API key. So have that available, or you can skip a particular check and say audit all except for front-end, for example. So audit cache, this is an example of one of the badly configured sites. So Drupal's caching settings, so it'll give you a high-level description of what's being checked. So this is the report, 17%. So this is the quantifiable part. It's an arbitrary number based on like the number of passes and fails that have occurred and the level of failures they are. So it'll say what is checking anonymous caching. It'll report the result of that. In this particular case, anonymous page caching is not enabled. Then the actionable recommendation: go to min config development performance and check cache pages for anonymous users. So right away, it's like you have the complete context of what's going on. The high level, what's the report caching, the individual check, the problem, and how to rectify it. There's also a detailed results view, which will give you information that is both the things that have passed and also the things that might just be purely informational, in addition to the things that are problems. So this is kind of, show me, the first version is basically just show me what's wrong. That's usually what people want to know. They want the actual recommendations or just a validation, just like, yep, 100%, cool, I can move on. Or I want to find all the information out. So it'll tell me minimum cache lifetime, verify that Drupal's minimum cache lifetime is set to never expire. Okay, this passed, no problem, minimum cache lifetime is set to none. There. And so there's also the same failures in there. Cache compression, verify that Drupal set compressed cache pages are not compressed. And this is also another example of a contextual report. So on Pantheon, for example, Varnish already compresses cache pages. So the recommendation is not to compress cache pages on Pantheon. So there's also different formats available, such as JSON. This is how LaunchCheck consumes output. So it contains the list of all the checks, the machine name of the check, the action itself, which is the actionable recommendation, the description of the check, the label, is like has it is it been enabled? In this particular case, this is the cron check, and then the result, which is kind of like the text version of it. You said you have disabled cron, which will prevent routine system tasks from executing, and then a score. This is an arbitrary number. It's a limited domain. 0 is a failure. -1 is -1 is just purely informational. 1 is pass. So it's a limited domain, and you can actually design an interface around that and surface these reports in any way you see fit. There's also HTML output built into it that uses just basic structure. This isn't particularly pretty, but it works, and you can integrate that within an application. Don't like that? Fine. Let's add Twitter Bootstrap to it. So their Bootstrap 3 is built into it, and also if you do audit all, and doing skip insights, which that's slightly out of date. It should be skip front end now. -HTML and Bootstrap. It'll give you a nice color-coded menu right up at the top that'll actually give you a quick navigation. Give you colors, so because people respond to colors usually pretty well. So best practice is 100%. No action required. Block 50%. Oh, that's a problem. So this is something that you could actually put in front of at least this this top part as an executive summary. It's like, hey, just tell me what's the health of this site? Oh, there's a bunch of red. We should probably do something about it. Oh, it's all green. Good job. Let's move on. So Site Audit does a lot of things, but we're human. There's a bunch of different. We can only do so much. There's many other projects out there that audit sites in different ways, and some of them use techniques that I don't personally want to engage in, such as the DrupalCorn scanners, which were basically signature-based scanners. So they were looking for particular usernames. I didn't want to get in that game because it's like to defeat a username scanner, you just change the username. Good job. Now I have to re-add it. I didn't want to get in that game, but I wanted to provide a mechanism for other people to extend Site Audit or just have their particular edge cases and use cases. For example, security review. So modules can implement both the checks, those kind of atomic little kind of like unit tests, and then reports, which are like that collection of tests. So for the caching example, caching is the report, and the check is just checking to see if anonymous page caching is enabled. There's documentation. There's a README markdown that in the site root describes how to do it. There's a Drupal.org issue queue and also a GitHub issue queue and a pull request if you want to extend it in the core, or if you just want to see how it's been put together. So, hey, we are an open source community and we should act like it. So let's try not to be too proprietary in what we do. If you write a check that looks for something that may apply to a bunch of different customers and you're using a tool like Site Audit, why don't you contribute it back a little bit? Sharing is caring. Not every dozens of people have worked on Site Audit over the past few years. While I put it together, I could not have done it without many, many people's help. And the only way that tools like this, and honestly the community, continue to grow is if we collaborate together and benefit from each other's knowledge. So I've been working on Site Audit Drupal console support, and it works. There's been, we'll say, discussions between the communities of Drupal console and Drush about what the best approach is. I'm trying to find something that kind of works for both of them, that uses Symfony best practices and tries not to be too Drupal-y. In a perfect world, I don't want to do anything that is not native to Symfony or DrupalCorn itself. So this is kind of like the middleware solution. This is the 3.x iteration. I haven't had a lot of time to work on it, but it is continuing to evolve. I'm also trying to standardize some of the output and to make it a little bit more agnostic. Some of the JSON output, for example, has a mixture of markup, which if you enable HTML, and it really should be a bit more granular. So I'm working on it. There's some IA that needs to happen. So there's a number of tools that exist now that have Site Audit support, and this is a few of the ones that I know about. Unused Modules is a project that looks for unused modules. These are things that exist in extensions that exist in your code base that that are not enabled and have no dependencies and are just sitting there taking up space. So it lists projects that can be safely deleted and ignores disabled child modules. So for example, if I have Views installed and I've disabled Views UI, it's not going to recommend that you uninstall Views UI because it is actually part of Views, the bigger package, and so it's contextually aware there. There's security review, which I mentioned a couple times. It's a fantastic utility for auditing Drupal 7 sites, and I think there's a Drupal 8 version. I'm not sure what its stability level is, but it exists. And it does exactly that. It actually does some very comprehensive checks, including like checking the permissions of the system, like whether or not it can, Drupal itself can write to the site root, for example, or whether or not errors are being reported directly to users. It will also do some content checks, like, for example, dangerous checks not found in any submitted content. So it'll actually scan the content for things that are kind of squirrely. So it checks the site and the hosting configuration. Hacked is an interesting module, which that screenshot, despite it saying version 6, is actually from the hacked page. Site Audit does not work on Drupal 6. But what it does do is do a comparison between the versions of the modules that you have and the versions that are on Drupal.org. This is useful in a number of ways. Like if your site has been hacked and for whatever strange reason you don't actually have it in version control, you can see what's changed. You can also use that to detect patches or alterations that may be being done by a developer who has a less than scrupulous patching process. So you can see exactly what the difference is. One caveat, hacked is not press flow aware, so it'll if it sees a press flow 6 or 7 site, it's going to freak out and say, what have you done to this? Sensitive data is a new module that I learned about actually about an hour or two before my presentation at DrupalCorn NOAA, but it will scan for sensitive data, things like social security numbers or credit card numbers. And so it does a scan of content. So it's a neat module and was designed explicitly with Site Audit support, which is cool. Cache audit. So I mentioned that Site Audit does provide auditing and caching, but it doesn't do everything. And this tool actually gets a little bit more granular than I do. But it'll also, one of the nice things that it does is audit panels as well. And I'll be a bit more granular in the checks that I do. Now we're going to start getting into other utilities such as PHP Code Sniffer and Coder. So why is it in this section? Oops. Anyway, PHP Code Sniffer is a tokenizer that will actually scan your code. And Coder is a development tool that includes, among other things, code scans that will check for Drupal best practices and coding standards. Specifically, coding standards is what I'm most interested in, ensuring like consistency of the custom code within your site. The recommendation, even though this might seem a little strange, is use the Drupal 8 version of Coder to analyze even Drupal 7 sites. You don't have to enable it, you just need to tell PHP Code Sniffer where, the path to the module for the Drupal sniffs, the rules for doing the coding standard checks. There's both Drupal and Drupal practice sniffs. Drupal practice sniffs are best practices. It detects deviations from the Drupal coding standards. An extension to that is parreview.sh. That's actually a website, but also a collection of scripts. But this is a site that does analysis of contrib modules, and it's actually, I think at this point, a hard requirement of getting a module promoted from a sandbox project to a full project and giving you right access on Drupal.org. You need to be able to get your custom code to be able to pass these checks. And it's running PHP Code Sniffer behind the scenes and those Drupal practice sniffs. So, and it provides you with those actionable recommendations. There are a number of PHP tools, which is where that PHP Code Sniffer should have been living. PHP Copy Paste Detector does, well, exactly that. It's available on GitHub. PHP Mess Detector will check for things such as possible bugs, suboptimal or unreachable code that exists, or overcomplicated expressions. So if you have like if, and you have that nice little kind of wedge-shaped piece of code, it'll yell at you and say, please don't do that. That's not a good idea. PHP lines of code. Lines of code are a fantastic metric that will give you context into a site. They should not be used as a sole representation of a developer's worth. But we'll give you context if, like, they say, it's like, yeah, I've been working on that for a week. It's like, okay, cool. If they started from ground zero and then after a week there's 10 lines of code, maybe something's a little strange. So it measures the size and the structure of the site. So it'll also like tell you the number of classes and namespaces, for example, that exist in a particular directory. Git Tools will also give you context. GitHub obviously will give you like contributor reviews and like who's been working on a project, but there are some offline tools that can be used as well that will give you context. So this is an example of Git stats, and here are the commits by month. So this started in 2013, and wow, we got like these big peaks in 2014, going all the way over here, and then suddenly drops off. When did this site get delivered to a client? And then we have the sole developer working on it from that point on. So you can actually get some meaningful information about this, and just some context into the history of the site and like how active someone has been working on a site. So tools like Git Stats or Git Inspector will provide you with kind of similar types of analysis. There are a number of JavaScript tools that are available. For example, ESLint. Available at eslint.org, will do checking coding standards and best practices in JavaScript files. As of Drupal 8 has had an ESLint configuration in the site root, and as of Drupal 7.50, woo, it is finally available in Drupal 7 as well. It's the same file, not a big difference, but it's a publicly linkable utility for JavaScript files. JSCS is JavaScript coding standards. There is a terrifying amount of crossover between the two utilities and a little bit of community griping at one another. But there's Drupal has chosen that particular utility, but it will also just check JavaScript coded styles. JSHint will detect errors and potential problems. Usually, if you choose one of these tools and focus on just one of them, especially between ESLint and JSHint, if you can get your code to pass with a reasonable configuration, then you should be good. If you run all three of them, you can, but you don't necessarily have to. There are a number of hosted utilities that are available. Things that are not available locally. For example, webpagetest.org is a fantastic utility. It will perform 2 requests against a particular URL, do a comparison between the two, and provide a very comprehensive caching report, and also talking about the performance of the page, the weight of the page. For the example, on this particular site, the first view, the load time was 3.8 seconds. The repeat view, which is checking the cacheability of the page, is 2.4 seconds. And it goes all the way over here, like how many DOM elements exist, how many requests it took. Like the first request, the first page took 52 requests. The second one took 7. And also over here, which is actually a really cool metric, is the cost. And this is putting the looking at the weight of the page and making a quantifiable analysis against like the cost of like someone with a mobile broadband connection, which especially if you're working with international audience or people say in rural areas, cost of a page actually becomes incredibly important, especially if you're dealing with low speed connections. Also, some hallmarks of what I consider effective audit, in which it gives you both a letter score, so you have a quantifiable result, and also calling for a little bit of semantic meaning. So there's also Google PageSpeed Insights, which does a slightly different analysis, and also provides actionable recommendations. And provides a quantifiable score, gives you a list of like the things that can be fixed. Google Page, I actually recommend using both tools because they will provide slightly different recommendations. There will absolutely be crossover between the two. If you make one happy, the other will be mostly happy. So, part of your complete balanced breakfast, use more than one tool and get a different perspective. There's the Wave Web Accessibility tool, which was actually just discussed in the past presentation that we just came from, where I just came from, which I highly recommend. It's available at wave.webaim.org, and it does accessibility checks, checking for ARIA errors, or checking for city images that don't have alt text, checking for contrast problems, for example, so which will affect people who are colorblind or have vision impairment, for example. So fantastic utility to execute and provides actionable recommendations on how to fix those problems. So another analysis you can do is the Qualys SSL server test, which will check the certificates of the site and and give you like really specific recommendations around like this is what you're vulnerable to, this is what you should upgrade to. So if you run it against your own sites and make sure you're protected, then run it against your client sites. So. Fantastic amount of information. This is a terrifying amount of information, and it's really, really tempting to like say, look at all this work that I did, all these tools that I put together. How do you actually like deliver those results in a way that isn't overwhelming and blasting kids out of the 80s? Well, you press a button that makes reveal.js hide everything. I don't know what button that was. Awesome. Good stuff. B? Yay! Thank you. All right, so structure of a report. So there's I like to lead with a kind of like an overview of the scope. So it's like what are we actually looking for? What was the goal of the audit? For example, I'm looking at cgap.org, and the point of the audit was to ensure that it's accessible to people who have mobile broadband connections, and there's concerns around performance and also accessibility. And then what are the actual recommendations? Like right up front, like you don't have to tell them everything that was wrong, just like what needs to happen. So caching needs to be configured, aggregation, consider using aggregation, CDN, these modules are out of date and there are security problems, make these changes, try to make them as actionable recommendations as possible that can be done kind of like a checklist, go through and fix these things. It isn't necessarily a guarantee that this will fix all your problems, but if you do these things, you will achieve a new level of stability and be much closer to that original goal. And then, so you do have a fantastic information, make it available, in an appendix, like at the end. It's like if you want to actually go through and see all the work, which you should. Don't hold that close to your chest. Make it available, but just put it in an appropriate place. So you include instructions on how to install and use the tools. It's like you can enable. If you are not the one who's going to be personally implementing it, give the context. It's like, hey, this is we use PageSpeed Code Sniffer and and Coder to be able to check out these coding standard deviations. WebAIM available here. Gave you these ARIA recommendations. So you can use those tools and be able to, in a quantifiable and replicatable way, you can run those same tools and be able to measure progress over time. You also want to include the raw results, so you can actually have a comparison between those results. For example, with Google PageSpeed Insights, okay, but when I first started working on this project, it was a 40. When I was done working on the project, it was a 90. I actually have this quantifiable difference between them. I can see that that particular score has improved. A tool that is useful for publishing large structured reports that have a lot of text that I recommend is using GitBook. It's available gitbook.io. It's also a commercial product, but it has a standalone open source Node.js based version that you can install locally. So it's a book format and a tool chain for using Git and Markdown for generating structured reports. It'll generate HTML. It'll generate PDFs, which especially for delivering a report, it's nice to be able to hand someone just like one standalone file. It's command line facility uses Node, outputs in a number of different structures. So the GitBook structure itself, and this is an actual report that with a little bit of find and replace, you don't actually have the names of the sites, but you can structure. You have a summary.markdown, which contains a markdown list, nested list that will actually define the structure of the report, and then you can just preview that and see what it's going to look like. And it will, when it renders, I did it again. When it renders, you will the navigation system will actually reflect that structure. So very, strongly recommended, just because being able to store the contents of a very long report in a Git repository, for example, is way easier than trying to manage it in something like Word, or if you try to make a 50-page document in Google Docs and see how long you want to stick with that. So GitBook is fantastic. This is, I don't think I'm quite going quite as far as like to look underneath your chair and see if you have the Site Audit co-maintainer, but hey, if help is wanted, like there's there's a lot of things that are challenging me for my time, and also like any product is stronger with a group working on it. So if anybody's interested, submit an issue, like especially if you have other contrib modules or like do open source work, the answer is probably going to be yes. If you've never done anything open source before, solve a few issues and then let's talk. So, the final takeaway that I have is, when we're doing all these checks, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is improve a site. And, a tools-based approach is one way of doing it. It does give you actual recommendations that, may seem kind of arbitrary, but this is a real-world site that was, hosted on Pantheon, and you have that kind of, that support ticket, that kind of common client complaint, like, my site is slow. Well, it's like, okay, you look at a utility that says, quantifiably, okay, how is it slow? Well, all right, we have all this work being done in PHP, all this work being done in the database, but it kind of at a consistent level. And then so I might check, Site Audit and say, okay, what's going on? It's like, oh, basically caching isn't turned on. It's like, okay, do X, Y, and Z, check, make these changes. And then, Varnish starts caching it correctly. Drupal starts, doing a lot less work with fixing PHP errors that were, causing the site to slow down. Good configuration matters. So, use utilities that will help surface that to you and make actionable recommendations and make stuff work. Thank you very much. Do you folks have any questions?
Where can we get the slides?
The slides are available on GitHub, which I'm going to post the actual PDF of the slides on the session once I get a replacement login, because I seem to have forgotten my generated password for the site. I'll also tweet them out. But github.com/fluxsauce, FLUXSAUCE, and it's, I think, how-to-audit-Drupal, I think, is the repo.
It's not on github.io.
It is on github.io, but I don't remember. But I don't remember like the full URL. That's the one. And then there'll be a link right there.
Excellent, thank you. Fluxsauce.github.io/how-to-audit-Drupal.
And there's, I don't even remember what that feedback link does. Oh, that's for, if you want to give me feedback for DrupalCon New Orleans, click that link. So,
were you good there? I just need to know for,
yes.
Okay, just so I know what kind of quality of.
No, this is, it was, I have a picture. Oop. Ignore that. That's an old joke. I'm sorry. That's really inappropriate for this. Okay. If you go to twitter.com/fluxsauce, that background image is people out the door for that presentation. That was a full room. That's embarrassing. I'm sorry. It's a bunch of really bad jokes. All right. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it. Thanks.